Test 1, 2, test 1, check 1, 2.
Oh, yes, there was some. He was here. I don't know. No. Okay. I'm thinking. Yeah, one of you guys.
Even have a wonky looking face.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to call the meeting hearing to order, and we're going to open up as a subcommittee. Frank, are you ready? ready to proceed with your opening.
I am. Thank you. I'll just give my closing statement on the bills here: 2068, 2069, 2070, and 2071. And I think it's these bills are important to protect women and to protect the no woman should have to feel like they are being taken advantage of in this process. In our state, there is a right to choose, and there are those who agree or who do not agree with it, but they should not have to worry about being subjected to less than safe abortions so that baby body parts can be salvaged and sold and profited from for research. So these bills they've been filed from committee work, and the purpose of them is to close the loophole. So I thank the committee for their consideration.
Thank you. President Coney, do you want to close?
Yeah, it's really simple. You either believe that fetal tissue should be sold for profit, or you don't. If you believe it should not, then you should support these bills. These are common sense reforms to make sure that these activities are not happening in the state. And I also have a news article I'd like to pass out.
Okay, thank you. If we can assist with that, I think we'll now move into witnesses, and I think the chief, Eric, is going to take over. Yes.
Yes, Representative Neely, I believe that we discussed during the interim about the importance of dealing with medical terminology while we're dealing with medical policy.
Okay, yes.
And if you could help
Can
me.
you clarify? Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Our first witness will be Dr. Shirley. Dr. Shirley, as you're getting situated, we're going to go ahead and call the roll for committee. And this will be our first witness in favor of the legislation. And we'll call the roll here in just one moment.
Representative Franklin.
Here.
Representative Neely. Here. Representative Meredith.
Here.
Representative Beard. Representative Bratton. Representative Brown. Representative Cannon.
Here.
Representative Hitler. Representative Lauer. Representative Newman.
Here.
Representative North.
Here.
Representative Ringwald.
Thank you. Would you introduce yourself and then proceed with your testimony?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James L. Shirley. To give some background, I'm trained as both a physician and a scientist. I've had 22 years of studying cancer research and adult tissue stem cell biology. About 3 years ago, I started a biotech startup company. That company is focused on bringing new technologies to advance research in clinical trials and also in medicine that's based on adult tissue stem cell biology. I want to thank the committee for giving me an opportunity today to share with you and perhaps address some of your questions that are relevant to the bills that are before us. I've learned a lot of things having been in Missouri for about a couple of days now. And I'm very impressed with the laws that I've seen that are already on the books here. And the things that have impressed me about those laws is that, number one, they recognize and acknowledge that human fetuses are living human beings. And They recognize that because of this nature of fetuses, that they are worthy of having dignified, if in this country where we have laws that allow abortion of fetuses, it's still important they have dignified treatment, that they not be used for other purposes such as research and also for medical treatment. And so it's really, I think, a model in Missouri for other states to follow. We're here today to talk about new bills to fortify those existing laws. And these new bills are very important because what they do is they comprehensively increase the likelihood of compliance to starting laws. They also increase the likelihood that there will be documentation of that compliance. And that's a really important process, for those types of things being in place. So what I want to try to do in my testimony today is to address issues that I think will be useful to the committee in terms of thinking about the importance of the bills that are in front of them. I want to address some issues that come up in terms of fetal research and some aspects of the bills that are particularly important, I think, in terms of from a scientific perspective. The first thing I wanted to do, and I hope I accomplish this with the room today, is to assure everyone here that we don't do fetal research with aborted fetuses, that we are not going to harm biomedical research. That we're not going to lose something that we couldn't get otherwise if we didn't, other than by using aborted fetus and the tissue derived from them. Now, the reason I say that is because the sort of proposition is that there are certain types of research that can only be done in this way. And one of the things that we know about scientific research is that it's rich in the fact that there are multiple ways of approaching scientific problems and doing scientific discovery. And in fact, the higher standard for science is for work not to be done in a single system, but to be done in multiple systems. One of the things to understand about us as scientists, if you make fetal tissue available to us, we'll use it. If you don't make fetal tissue available to us, we'll find alternatives. An important thing here is to realize that there are alternatives. We have many of them that are used in various other areas of medicine and research as well. We have animal models, we have cell models, even human beings who can consent, adults, can be models for other questions in embryos and fetuses. So it's important to recognize that this is not our only choice. And to the extent that we value the dignity of embryos and fetuses, we need to know that there are other ways of getting to new treatments, new cures. I think another thing you need to weigh when you're thinking about this is that science, especially when it's challenged with needing alternatives, in finding them, there's always new technologies coming about. And one of the early reasons for being interested in, I want to give you really, hopefully this will be a good example of what I mean by how technology really matters and technology is moving forward. So if you ask the question early on, and even now, what is the interest in doing research with fetuses and aborted fetuses specifically? Well, it turns out that the fetus, because of its nature, is the easiest tissue to derive cell lines from that you can grow in culture. The growth factors there are tremendous. And so they've been interested in using that fetal material for that purpose. But we don't need to do that anymore. There are new technologies where you can take tissue from consenting adults and turn it into material cells that have very similar properties to what you see with fetuses. In fact, one of the plans for this new research, which is called induced pluripotent stem cells, was to have a way of not using embryos, not using fetuses, to make mature tissues that are in our bodies as we sit here today. Now, it turns out that when these cells were made, it was discovered that the types of cells that they best model are not cells that are in the mature body, they're cells that are in the fetal body. So we have a very good alternative for doing research that might impact on fetuses, because these cells, as a matter of their nature, want to become fetal-like issues. So the thing, again, I just want to emphasize is that if, in the absence of using these tissues for research, that we're one of the issues is doing fetal research for the benefit of the fetus. And there are technologies now that are sufficiently safe to not put the mother at risk and actually do surgery on fetuses in utero. So if we are able to, as scientists, to respect the dignity of humans, humanity, science will find a way to get to the answers that we need for many of the treatments and cures that we're looking for. I want to turn now to the bills that addresses the issue of whistleblowing. Very important to shore this type of legislation up because it's very easy to wreck and ruin a scientific career or careers in general. And some of us have had that experience. We need to have things in place that when someone sees something happen which is illegal, they have the support and they have the knowledge to do something about it. One of the things that I saw initially in these bills in the first form, as well as an amendment now, is that they were sort of focused on compliance within the source institution, where the aborted fetuses were, where they were being examined, where they were being transferred. But not much was done on the outside, but potentially receiving institutions in violation of the existing laws. So one of the really powerful things I think about the legislation now is that it looks at that and it treats it like other types of legislation that we have. So for instance, in a university, in a laboratory, in a pharmaceutical company, when it comes to things like what we call chemical hygiene, occupational health and safety, those are laws that protect the individuals who work there. And we are giving routine training about them. They're required to be posted so that we are aware of them. And this is really important for protecting people who may at some later point be the ones who let us know that illegal acts are taking place. So not everybody knows that using fetal tissue is illegal in the state. I'm pretty sure of that. And so it's important to provide education and support as well. Another factor I want to highlight when it comes to whistleblowing is that it's more likely that whistleblowers will be more junior than senior. They'll be the ones who are asked to do things. They'll be the ones who are in the least position to actually be able to be strong enough to do something about it. So we really need to think about supporting them. They'll be the ones earliest in their careers. So that's another feature, I think, having this education and the support so they're aware of what their rights and responsibilities are is really important. I want to close with the focus in these bills on language and how the human fetus aborted, how the parts of the fetus are referred to. It's as simple as this about us as human beings. We treat people the way we think about them. And if we're told that these aborted fetuses are medical waste, if people who are working and responsible for doing the right thing by the law have in their mind that this has nothing to do with human beings, they will treat aborted fetuses as if they are not. But education and teaching so that people understand what it is they are moving from place to place. They will then respect it more and will get better compliance with the law. There's been some talk, I'll just mention briefly about using medical language. I just want to let everyone know, if you go and look in a medical dictionary for the words child, baby, they're all there. It's medical language too, because medicine looks at what we are. And sometimes we're embryos, and sometimes we're fetuses, we're babies, we're children, we're just preborn. So I think what I've heard here in my time this morning and now this afternoon has all been medical language. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions that there might be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Shirley, for your testimony. And could you give us an idea of the environment in which you work in Boston?
So since I started a new company, the environment I work in right now probably isn't very relevant.
Okay.
But for many years, I led laboratories as a principal investigator. And that environment is a laboratory-like environment. If you were to come there, you would see hallways and laboratories with young people busy working in white coats. I work in both clinical environments as well as university environments where the medical school might be down the street, but it isn't right next door. So primarily what you would call, they sometimes refer to as wet bench laboratories. That's the environment that I work in, that I'm most familiar with.
You have spoken that and contributed actually to the whistleblower language. And do you have any experiences where you see that this is indeed valuable? That you
So I talked about junior people maybe being the ones who are going to be at most risk for whistleblowing. One of the reasons I said that is based on a single experience of my own where a young investigator came to work in a university laboratory, was not aware that, and this is in Massachusetts where these laws don't apply, but discovered that the laboratory was in fact working with fetal tissue and had not been informed. And so this isn't so much an issue of whistleblowing as much as an issue of personal conflict and how to address that to the lab head who was requesting that he participate in this research. So if you move that to a place like Missouri, you can see what the problem would be. But we have another kind of whistleblowing I think is also relevant here too, because we're talking now about aborted fetuses and how they are examined and transferred and disposed. But I mentioned earlier that we have lots of requirements. Law requires that we treat materials, chemicals, radioactivity a certain way. And there are times when laboratories, in fact, misuse those materials. There's always a problem with compliance with the rules. And there's a case where, again, usually it's junior people who discover that a laboratory is mishandling some radioactive label, and then they are required by law to report it. And there are procedures for doing that. In the best case scenario, you can bring it to the attention of the head of the laboratory, and he or she does something about it. But there are other people in the institution who are also there. Sometimes they're called ombudsmen, where you can go and let them know something's going on that you think shouldn't be going on. So there's a lot of, I think, practice around this for other types of regulations that have to do with the way laboratories are run.
I don't know if this is a question you can answer and then throw it out there. You know, in certainly Representative Koenig's bill, he has some steps and labeling for transferring the aborted babies to the pathology labs. And so do you feel that those are prudent, effective steps, and do they accomplish what we're hoping to do, which is protecting women?
I think it's really important that in these environments and for these operations that there's transparency. People need to know what they're working with. They need to know what they're responsible for. Otherwise, they can't act appropriately. They can't be sure of what's going on. And you may look at this and say, well, gee, isn't this going to be onerous and maybe this is going to be expensive to do this? But we do it all the time for things like activity, chemicals that are hazardous. Because, again, in this case, it's about protecting the work. Here, I think it's very important in our society that we think about protecting the human dignity. And I think it's also unfair to people not knowing what their disposition is regarding these activities, whether they are for them or against them, to inform them what they're participating in so they can make a choice about it.
And then there was a story that broke out of Indiana where our medical waste, which was actually the fetuses were, the company in Indiana was not supposed to be handling these, was not supposed to have them, and I guess they weren't given knowledge of what it was they were accepting. Our Planned Parenthood transferred those to St. Louis to the pathology lab. That pathology lab then transferred those on to a 3.5-hour drive to another state to a company that does not have a permit to handle that. What do you see? What is the breakdown in that? Where did that? Was someone not asleep at the wheel, not paying attention? Where did that? Do you have any idea?
So let me preface this by saying that I don't have exact, precise knowledge about the goings on there. However, I am involved in translating things like human tissue. So again, the work that we do with adult stem cells is based on having tissue from an individual who's been considered and informed, donating it, and then it goes to a procurement facility, and that procurement facility basically gives it out with special regulations. You have to be a certified laboratory investigator to do that. There's a lot of volume. And a big part of getting it right, in fact, for the investigators, is labeling. To be sure that what comes into my laboratory is, in fact, what was specified to come there. So, again, if this is a situation where an accident happened, the way you deal with accidents is with better process. And if that wasn't the case, you're still better off. So my thinking on this, again, in a general sense, is that there may be some breakdown in that process.
Okay, so would you describe your process to us? How you dispose of medical waste, or how you did in your
Yeah. So again, the kinds of well, a good example. Some of the most significant work I think our group has done is with human liver. I'll start with the question of where does it come from? You want to know what the source is. How is it being sourced? We need to be sure that the individuals who donated their body to us were appropriately informed and consented. So that has to do a lot with where it's happening. Is it happening at a facility that you're comfortable with? Now, the way liver gets to the laboratory is because when liver transplants are done, often there's not a good fit into the new cavity. Oftentimes the liver is being put into someone who's often smaller. So there's liver trimmings that are left over. If the donor consents to that being used for research, it goes to a national organization called the National Disease Research Interchange. And from there, laboratory investigators are appropriately certified. That's another piece of it. Not just anyone can get access to that material. Apply for it. And it's provided with a triage system. So there's a lot involved in who's getting it when, because it's a very limited source. And then one day you're going to call on the phone and you have to act immediately. At least within a couple hours to receive the material. That's another part of the agreement that you will act appropriately with. So when we're done, there's material left over to finally get the material. And it's incinerated on site. And the donor understands that that was what was going to happen in the end, and that research was going to happen someplace in between. And if you look at that, again, I've worked in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts. Yeah, those three, and that's standard practice.
Do you see the donor agreement? Do you see the donor? Is there a donor record? I guess what the donor has signed. So
if requested, we can see it, and in some cases, I have seen it because some of the funding institutions require it. In general, so you have to sort of always layer time onto these processes. 20 years ago, absolutely. Now with these big national organizations, people reach a level of confidence in them. So the granting agency doesn't require to see that form anymore. But there's regulations from the federal government to make sure those forms are there. Let me also say that although I'm not a practicing physician, during my training, I was also involved in gaining patient consent. And there are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. So, and again, there's systematic process for doing this. Your training teaches you how this to be done properly.
To the committee, are there questions from the committee? Vice Chair Neely,
Inquiry, please.
you may.
Thank you, Doctor, for being here today. You kind of made me go back to my life a number of decades ago. Where my first experience was looking at my cadaver, and then as I moved forward in time and dealt with things that come through the emergency room, and you know, it's those little souls that I've seen aborted, whether it's done through a clinic or just a miscarriage. Those are still present in my mind, more so than the car wrecks. I think your statement about how you perceive the things is so thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Representative Bratton, you may.
In regards to Missouri law, you know, whenever they send what's required by our statute is a representative sample of an aborted fetus or remains. To you, what would that, in your mind, what would that entail?
The word representative would tell the entire fetus. I mean, if you think about the complexity of our bodies, a piece from my finger is not going to be representative of what's going on in my liver. So I'll qualify that by saying, what's the purpose of the sample? The sample is to understand what was going on in the biology and the physiology of that fetus is insufficient. Is this about getting a DNA measurement or something? Then in that case, it might be sufficient. But my understanding of this law, that the idea is to get some indication of what was going on in that fetus. Yeah. So representative, if you really want to be exact, it should be comprehensive.
Okay, so, all right, thank you, I appreciate that.
Other questions? Any closing comments?
Again, thank you for having the opportunity to share in what I think is really very important work for all of us.
All right, the intention then for the committee is to take testimony for about 45 minutes now. I think what we'll do is go with the what we have to be sure and do is ask you which bill are you testifying on, and you have to fill out a form, one of our witness forms indicating which bill that you are testifying on. Okay. The Secretary is very strict about that. Be sure I do that. All right, we have come to a consensus here. We will take testimony, again, per bill, the number of bill you're testifying on, Those that are in favor of the bill, we're going to do 15 minutes of testimony. Then we'll do 15 minutes in opposition and allow 15 minutes for informational purposes only. That's 45 minutes. So with that, we'll take anyone who is in favor of the bill that would like to testify, please. I may amend this at any time. If we only have 5 minutes of testimony in favor, then that's what we'll do.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Samuel Lee with Campaign Life Missouri, to go on record in support of all 5 bills: House Bill 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, and 2371. And you do have my witness forms and should have written testimony, should be distributed, which has an attachment. I'm not going to read that. First of all, I think what many people find most disturbing about these videos that began to be released last summer is just the severe absence of accountability and the profound lack of respect for the deceased unborn children. We want to thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Koenig, and all the members of this committee, of the House Ways and Means Committee, for working hard to uncover the truth about what's going on, even though you did not get the participation of witnesses that you had asked repeatedly to join. And we thank you also for not just holding hearings, but for the report that you submitted to the Speaker of the House last month. And I think that process and that report should be a template for any future committee which is looking at whatever the situation might be, a template for how to conduct an investigation, try to get to the truth, and then provide solutions, which you are doing today with the 5 bills that you are presenting. When the Planned Parenthood executive from California, Dr. Mary Gatter, said in the second video that she was willing to ask another abortion doctor to, quote, use a less crunchy technique to get more whole specimens. And then later during that dialogue, when they were talking about compensation for procuring these baby body parts, she said, I said I want a Lamborghini. I think that really shocked people. It affected me possibly more than any other statement. And I know your constituents have been contacting you since last summer. It's affected you. And I know that's what those types of statements and that type of sentiment has been driving what you're doing. I think the 5 bills that have been presented are a noble attempt to bring accountability and respect back into abortion practice in our state in order to protect women who are considering abortions. No woman who is walking into an abortion clinic in this state or into a hospital for an abortion should have to worry about the doctor maybe changing the abortion procedure, the abortion technique, which might be less safe for her, but is more likely to achieve a less crunchy or a whole specimen. No couple should have to wonder after they leave an abortion clinic whether the remains of their unborn child are going to end up in some incinerator or some dump or something like that. You know, it is engraved in the hearts of men and women of all cultures to have respect for the remains of the dead, both born and unborn. And this is very poignantly demonstrated at the National September 11 Memorial and Museum, which is at the site or near the site of the World Trade Center attacks in 2001. And at that memorial, there are some bronze parapets where the 3,000 names, or close to 3,000 names of those who were killed in those terrorist attacks are engraved. And after the names, on 11 of those names, you will find, after these female victims, pregnant victims, you will find these words written after the woman's name and her unborn child. The families and those who are involved in this memorial realized that the loss and the death of these unborn children, along with their mothers and their loved family members, really made a difference and really affected them. Nearby, as part of that memorial, to again demonstrate how much we have respect for the remains of the dead, there is a wall that has this inscription: "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." And behind this wall, it's not open to the general public, but behind this wall, there's a repository of thousands of unidentified remains that are there. And only the families of those who died in these attacks are allowed to go there, to pray, to mourn, to sit in silence. So this universal sentiment of accountability and respect for the remains of the dead, even those who are unidentified, is also confirmed at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery, which, as you know, Madam Chair and others know, is guarded 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and in any weather by a special select group of tomb guard sentinels. For those who serve in the military know that the United States Armed Forces take great effort to recover, identify, bury, and honor deceased men and women of the military, sometimes even decades, many decades after the end of hostilities. So it's understandable, Madam Chair, why many Missourians have been greatly disturbed by the cavalier attitude of some Planned Parenthood employees, as seen on the videos. You know, there are even some pro-choice supporters who believe that the remains of babies who die as a result of induced abortion should be respected in order to give parents an opportunity to grieve. For example, at the Cedar River Clinic's abortion facilities in the greater Seattle area, they offer grief support, bereavement resources, and funeral and cremation referrals. And the Boulder, Colorado abortion clinic says this on its website: for many of these patients, it is not a fetus, it's a baby. The woman and her family may request special procedures, such as special religious ceremonies, genetic studies, formal autopsy, private cremation, or private burial. Now, to those who have suggested that nothing has gone wrong here in Missouri, Madam Chair, you've already alluded to what's been going on in Indiana, but just this past last week, early this month, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, sort of comparable to our Missouri Department of Natural Resources, they find a solid waste disposal company called Metasure for violating their permit under Indiana law. Now, what they found is that not only were they violating the permit, but the executive vice president for Metasure said that they had only received a thumbnail sample of tissue. Now, there's an obvious discrepancy here. If you recall the testimony of Dr. Miller and as well the report of the Attorney General, it was strongly suggested that all the material was sent from Planned Parenthood, Pathology Services, and then on to this company. But now they are claiming, just this past week, that they received only a thumbnail sample. Now we're talking about babies that are aborted up to close to 22 weeks, which is a lot larger than a thumbnail. Somebody is not telling the truth. We will find out maybe eventually what the truth is. But in the meantime, we just want to thank you for offering these 5 bills and strongly encourage this committee to vote them out to pass.
Thank you. Other questions for this witness? All right. I mean, it is troubling. This continues to ripple and unravel how in Indiana, you know, the site for destruction of the abortions that take place in Missouri, you know, we allow up to 22 weeks abortion here, and then they're just receiving a thumbnail. And so, and the Attorney General looked at this and he has nothing more to say, it seems like, about this, where I think that most Missourians would be very concerned about the discrepancy that has occurred. And I think that this has been going on for quite a while, hasn't it?
I think 3 or 4 years is what the Indianapolis Star report indicated. Yes. 3
or 4 years. It sounds like there's more work to do.
Right.
Okay. Representative Bradley. You may.
You know, this has been probably one of the toughest, you know, things to have to investigate and to realize this sort of practice and selling of human parts is going on. And I'm blown away by the callousness that society has become. You know, this morning, as I was, you know, reading over this stuff, I got a news article across, you know, my newsfeed on my computer screen, and I was blown away. In Boulder, Colorado, there was a lady that was answering a Craigslist ad to buy by clothes for her soon-to-be newborn baby. And the lady was waiting there. And when she walked in while she's still pregnant, she intended to stab her and cut the unborn baby out of the mother and remove the baby. And while doing so, killed that baby by forcefully removing. The mother did live. And I can't believe in America that this sort of disgusting practice, that we have lowered ourselves to thinking that life is not life, even though everything scientific and medically points that these are lives. And we turn a blind eye. And then we have, I'm bringing it back around to what's occurring with the abortion industry. But not only are they carrying out a service that some are seeking, but they're taking it to the next level of raking in profit. And as a representative, I refuse to sit by and allow, or even think to allow, this sort of egregious, nasty, disgusting practice to occur in my state. And and after realizing, how wide open our system really is here in Missouri, I find no other reason than to do anything and everything we can to ensure that this will not and will never happen in this state. So I appreciate your testimony. I just
We know, Representative, you and this committee are building on the work of legislators that came before you. And so the horrible incident that occurred in Colorado, good news here in Missouri, if that were to occur there, that person who had slit open her abdomen and taken out the baby could be charged with murder because of a law that the General Assembly passed in 1986, upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1989. So we do have to build on what others have done. We have to look at the examples in other states of good things and not so good things in order to improve the lives and health of Missourians.
Other questions? See none, be sure to read your witness forms. All right, thank you. Others in favor? We are down to 3.5 minutes of our 15.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Susan Klein, representing the Missouri Right to Life Period 1 record in support of House Bill 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, and 2371. I appreciate, and all of our board does, and everyone across the state that is a member of Missouri Right to Life, appreciates the work that the Children and Families and the Ways and Means Committee have done in the interim period and what you're doing now. Based on the testimonies that have come out, not just the videos and the horrors that we saw in the videos, but the testimony that we've heard within our state, where the pathology lab doesn't know if all of the baby body parts are being shipped there. The director of the Department of Health, Gail Fasterling, in the Senate Sanctity of Life Committee, testified that our Department of Health does not know whether all of the baby body parts are accounted for or not. Even our current acting interim director doesn't know, but they say they're trying to correct the records and make sure that all of the reports are received from the pathology lab. So there is a need for this legislation that gives a true accounting and a following of what exactly is happening with aborted babies from Missouri. Obviously, with the Indiana information coming out, that a lot of the aborted babies from Missouri are ending up there. In our discussions with them, they said that there were trash cans full of aborted babies from Missouri. And so there needs to be a stronger accounting of what is going on. The dignity of these tiny babies who are losing their lives is important. And I think we need you to take action and close the loopholes in these laws that would be allowing this, or at least making sure that it's not happening here. And just as a side note, as a mother, whenever I went to my OBGYN and he told me that I was pregnant with our babies, he didn't tell me that they were fetuses. He told me, would you like to see a picture into the womb? and to see your baby, and the fingers and toes and the heart's beating, so, these are babies that we're talking about. When you look at the videos, you see whenever they're picking through there with these little tweezers, there's little hands and fingers and hearts. We can't stop abortion, but we can give dignity to these tiny babies who are losing their lives. I would ask, please, to pass these little pieces of legislation.
Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, be sure to leave us your witness forms. Thank you. All right, we have exhausted our time for proponents, but you're welcome to leave certainly your witness form sheets, written testimony, emails, etc. We'll be happy to take that. Now we'll do 15 minutes in opposition of the bills. Be sure to tell us which bill or bills you're speaking to.
Good afternoon.
And wait, okay, you'll need to fill out a witness form for each bill. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Rensler. I'm a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist at Washington University in St. Louis. I completed all of my medical training at WashU, including my medical school, my residency in obstetrics and gynecology, a fellowship in family planning, and a master's of science in clinical investigation. I'm here today to speak in opposition to House Bills 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, and 2371. 2731. My apologies. I'd like to start by speaking in opposition to House Bill 2068. And I'd like to ask you to remember that fetal tissue research has played an important part of our public health history. Vaccines preventing measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, and rabies were all developed using fetal cell cultures. And in fact, in 1954, a graduate of Mizzou was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work in developing a polio vaccine utilizing fetal cell cultures. I also want to ask you to imagine the possibilities of utilizing fetal cell cultures for research. Vaccines to prevent Ebola and HIV are currently being developed. Fetal tissue research is also advancing the treatment for strokes, spinal cord injuries, and ALS. And certainly we've all known individuals close to us that have been affected by these devastating diseases, and in each case we find ourselves wishing that we could have prevented them. I also want you to consider the message that this bill sends to the Missouri medical community. Bans on cutting-edge research sends the message to us in the Missouri medical community that life-saving innovations aren't valued. And as a result, expert researchers and their funding will not want to emigrate to Missouri. This would be a travesty given that Missouri is home to one of the nation's leading medical research institutions. But my opposition to HB 2068.
Are you speaking on behalf of the university?
I'm speaking on behalf of myself, my patients.
Oh, but you have your coat on. It makes me think you're speaking on behalf of the university.
My coat just has my name and my specialty. Thank you, though.
So are you speaking on behalf of the gynecologist, obstetrician gynecologist in general then?
I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Thank you. So my opposition to House Bill 2068 isn't only because I see the promise of life-saving advances in fetal tissue research, but also because I can envision the unintended consequences. I want to share the experience of one of my patients. She and her husband were thrilled to find out that they were pregnant for the first time. But that excitement quickly turned to sadness when she received the news that she had a lethal fetal anomaly called acrania. So that's a lethal fetal anomaly characterized by the absence of the skull bones. That's not compatible with life. When she came to my office, the first thing that she expressed was immense sadness at this diagnosis. And that she wouldn't have the same experience in her first pregnancy that all of her friends did. But then she was so happy. She described with great enthusiasm that she found a research program at Duke University that's studying fetal acrania. And she found solace knowing that her loss could provide women in the future potentially an answer about why this was happening to her, particularly because it happened to many members of her family who were diagnosed with fetal acrania prematurely. I thought her altruism was admirable. Unfortunately, I had to watch her hope turn to devastation as I told her that here in Missouri, fetal tissue is not allowed to be used for research. Not only was she deprived of emotional closure, but we also withheld an opportunity for her to directly impact impact her future childbearing and the childbearing of the female members of her family to come. I'd also like to address the bills 2071 and 2731, which propose the language that all fetal tissue be sent to a pathologist. The seemingly small change.
I'm going to stop you just for a minute. So there's not a change then, as you stated, in Missouri, fetal tissue research is not allowed at this time.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. I have a granddaughter that was born with disabilities as well.
Fetal acrania is a lethal anomaly, not a disability.
Well, she had a aneurysm in the womb, in the right front of her brain. So it was, it was a very discouraging diagnosis when we received that.
That must have been very challenging for your family. I'm sure that you handled it with grace. So like I said, I'd also like to speak on the bills 2071 and 2731, which propose that all fetal tissue be sent to a pathologist. The seemingly small change to the language has immeasurable effects on women. I strongly feel this would prevent me from providing the highest quality care, as I would no longer be able to offer genetic testing to women who are ending a pregnancy for a fetal anomaly, nor could I ensure that survivors of rape maximize their chance of conviction through DNA analysis of their pregnancy tissue. And I have two stories to tell you that are regarding this language. So when I consider the negative impact that these laws have, I think about a patient that my heart particularly aches for. We'll call her Julie, that's not her real name. And when I first met Julie, Julie said, I really hate PE, but I think I'm good at math. And I really like pizza. Julie was 12 years old when she was raped, and she was coming to see me for consultation. She started to feel sick, and so she Googled, why do I feel like I'm gonna throw up? And Google told her maybe she was pregnant. And so she told her grandmother, I think I'm pregnant. And she took a pregnancy test. And her grandmother helped her find me for care. At the time of her abortion, we were able to give pregnancy tissue to the detective waiting outside of the operating room, and this became evidence used to prosecute Julie's rapist. I fear that the proposed language would prevent me from providing any portion of that tissue to help convict the rapists of women and girls like Julie. The second story is a woman I cared for who also had a highly desired pregnancy, like that first story that I shared with you earlier. On ultrasound, she was noted to have multiple fetal anomalies concerning her genetic disease. And her and her husband chose to terminate their pregnancy, but in doing so, asked for us to test the tissue for specific genetic abnormalities. And in fact, her testing showed that there was a genetic imbalance that was passed down from the father. Having tissue available for genetic evaluation allowed this family to better understand their risk of recurrence and any therapies that we could offer to increase the chance that she could have a future healthy pregnancy. And although you and I may not agree on the importance of access to safe and legal abortion care, I do hope that we can agree that medicine and the regulation of such in our state should be guided by the highest quality, most rigorous scientific evidence, and not by political ideology. The women of Missouri deserve at least that. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Let me say that during a previous testimony, we heard how research is done in multiple ways, and that embryonic research is not, it doesn't necessarily yield the answer to every query that we have. And the ways that we do now are not taking the life of another human being in order to achieve those ends. And that was good news to me, because I'd heard that argument that vaccines wouldn't be developed, or we wouldn't find the cure to Alzheimer's, or many of those kinds of things. But through the testimony we heard today, there are many, many avenues for biomedical research. And I feel pretty confident that here in the state of Missouri, when you talk about research facilities and them not wanting to come into the state, that they are apprised of these multiple ways to do research and would be willing to come, and they certainly must conduct research today.
Absolutely. I was really fortunate to hear Dr. Shirley speak today, and he does bring up an excellent point that there are multiple ways that we could come to a cure or a treatment for many diseases. And like he mentioned, we often do that through multiple avenues at the same time. So in human stem cell research and tissue of embryos.
All right, other questions? Representative Bratton,
To inquire.
you may.
You brought up, about rape victims and things like that not being able to obtain, and that was in the 71, I believe. Now, would you support the bill if we amended it so where law enforcement did have access to such things? I get definitely the need for law enforcement tracing down, a disgusting rapist. I don't think you'll find any opposition to anything of that nature. But do you see kind of where we're coming at with to ensure that we want to stop what could be the ability for what we've heard testimony about the kind of the black market?
The issue isn't just for victims of rape, but also for families that have undergone a very devastating diagnosis, prenatal diagnosis. And so, you're providing only an exemption for women who are raped, but not in those other circumstances. I understand what your concern is.
Well, if we amended it to where genetic testing of their own, child specimen, but then from there on it goes back to the pathologist to ensure all parts are there.
I think it has less to do with the wording, but more to do with
I guess if it fixes what you're, I mean, that's not the attempt of us to inhibit, investigation or the ability to find out, disease or anything like that.
That's what it's at. That is your intention.
But you've heard the testimony of what we're trying to stop, correct?
I'm not quite sure I understand the purpose behind it.
You haven't heard at all the purpose of why?
But I'm not quite sure the purpose behind these bills. It's a little bit murky. And as a physician, I'm used to dealing in things.
Well, the language that we have, current statute, is murky to where there's a lot of wiggle room for the ability to take body parts and sell them for profit. So we want to stop that, but we don't want to stop. You don't know that for sure.
I am one of 5 abortion providers in the state of Missouri.
By videos and things of that nature, Missouri is specifically mentioned in that.
And what I know, every single abortion provider in the state of Missouri who are all trained the highest level of training to be an abortion provider. And all of us are very meticulous about the care that we provide women to ensure that we're providing the safest.
We're not talking about the abortion practice.
And I'm telling you that we ensure that all of the pregnancy tissue, with the exception of pregnancy tissue that gets sent for cytogenetics, which is genetic evaluation, or that goes to detectives for prosecution for rape, for rapists.
Well, we have the pathologist that received your specimen. He testified different.
Was he here today? I must have missed that.
No, over our interim committee. That's not what he testified to.
I'm not, unfortunately.
He's the one that receives the specimen.
Share that information with me.
Well, he testified that there's a whole lot of wiggle room of what they actually do investigate as to of what they're able to see and to do the report versus what was carried out.
I can assure you that as a provider who is in the room at the time that the pregnancy tissue is placed into the specimen containers and then sealed with an individual requisition for each specimen and then sent to pathology services, that all of the pregnancy tissue is in those specimen containers. I see it with my own eyes on every procedure that I perform.
You could speak to yourself, but how many did you say provide abortions?
There are 5 of us, and
I
feel confident speaking for all 5 of us that we're rigorously trained to act the mission to provide care for women and to do this procedure.
Well, you testify to that, but we have the pathologist that receives all your specimens testify opposite of that.
I'd be grateful if you would share that testimony with me.
It would have been great to have you here when we had our interim committee.
It would have been great. It's my understanding we were not invited.
Oh, now, come on. we're looking very seriously at a question during an intercommittee with a lot of publicity. And no one in Planned Parenthood reached out to you and said, hey, could you go testify for them?
I'm not aware if my partners were invited. But thank you.
Well, you know, we can revisit it and have you come back again.
I'd be happy to anytime.
That is great. Okay. Representative Newman,
Yes, to inquire, Madam Chair.
you may.
Real quickly, Dr. Grenzer, I know that we don't have much time for everyone to testify, especially after being here since 9 o'clock this morning. Real quickly, the former doctor who does not deal with and is opposed to any type of fetal cell research mentioned that particularly concerned about young residents, young medical students who are not always sure that could follow the laws. Is that anything that you've run across in terms of your studies, your teaching with young medical professionals, that they're tempted to not follow the law?
Absolutely not. So we have a rule at WashU. It's called stop the line, meaning if anybody at any point in any process while caring for patients sees anything that they think violates the highest quality of care, they have to yell, stop the line when that happens, and everybody is supposed to attend to the matter that they're concerned about.
So thanks for clearing that up. And I think also, he was really talking about the whistleblowing bill that we've got. The other thing I wanted to ask you in terms of going back to you began by mentioning all of the advances, particularly with fetal cell, research and the things that we are all, counting on these days. And I just noticed in my research myself that 38 states along with Washington, D.C. currently permit fetal tissue donation. And you mentioned that you were prevented from in your own case of someone even requesting to donate for potential research. How do you deal with the fact that we don't, or that we're trying to make it illegal for anyone to donate, and yet the majority of the states are allowing this?
I think that's a great question, and it's very challenging for me in my daily practice as I take care of women and try to provide the most compassionate care as they're dealing with a crisis situation where they're choosing to end their pregnancy for a number of reasons. And a lot of those women request to donate their fetal tissue, and it's hard for me. It makes me sad to say I'm sorry that I can't comply with your wishes. One of the sort of tenets of medical ethics is the tenet of patient autonomy, meaning that if it's reasonable, that they should have the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. And I think not being able to offer them this option when other states offer it violates autonomy. It also violates the medical ethical tenet of justice, which means that all patients should be treated the same regardless of socioeconomic status and location.
And last question, we do this quite a bit, here in the legislature. We debate medical policy. Not one of us on this, even this joint committee, is an OBGYN. Not one of us is a medical researcher, and yet we're placing things in statute that actually directly impact your work, not just you, but every medical professional in this state. And how does that put you, like you mentioned, at risk of your own medical ethics in terms of, you've heard today, people on this committee are not using medical accurate technology, and yet we're putting things in statute that now expecting that you have to follow with no expertise from us.
That's a really great point that you bring up. I've lived in Missouri, in St. Louis, for 11 years. I'm really proud to be a St. Louis citizen and really want to comply with all of the laws that are put forth by the Missouri legislature. And it's difficult for me to interpret the laws. I'm a physician. I read it in science and medicine. I don't read in layperson's terms. And so when laws around medicine are written in layperson terms that can be thought of in multiple different ways, it makes it hard for me to know that I'm in compliance with the law. So it'd be great if the legislature could, or if policymakers could write these things in terms that I would understand, that don't have any gray zone. And I think Representative Neely can appreciate that as a commissioner.
Well, and then again, you're here on behalf of the entire medical community because you are the physician who is able to leave your patients, your clinic, your whole entire schedule behind, which is, 2 hours away. But, back to your ethics, I mean, we do this over and over and over again. And how must it be with your other colleagues that you're working with, not just in your practice, but actually Washington University, in terms of this is all ideology. You've heard it today. You've heard that there are people on this committee that are opposed to abortion. You've heard people on this committee dispute any of the judicial rulings on a video that is false. You've heard this, and you understand where this committee is coming from in terms of these bills. And how do you translate that into, I mean, your colleagues, you must be so frustrated.
It's challenging to try to find coverage. So I've had 20 patients on my schedule today, and I hand wrote apology notes that I couldn't be there to see them today because I was here testifying. And one of my colleagues took over to see my patients, and then another of our colleagues had to take over to do her duties. So it's frustrating that we're here to discuss something that doesn't improve the safety of my patients and doesn't improve the care that they get.
In fact, like harms them. Thank you, Dr. Rosen.
Thank you, Doctor. Let me ask you, you talked a couple of times about safety and you used, there's that stop the line. Have you ever heard that called out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very common in our clinics and in our operating rooms.
Okay. And so I know at the abortion facilities there in St. Louis, there have been ambulances that have shown up to take individuals who were there for abortion procedures to the hospital. Then do you think that same term, stop the line, is that used there as well? Do you use that when you do an abortion?
I haven't had a complication where I needed to use that because abortion is incredibly safe. So the mortality rate for abortion is 0.0007.
Well, not for the baby. It isn't. It's 100% for the baby. Now, I want to go back and ask you about, you've never had to have anyone transferred to the hospital.
I have had somebody transferred to the hospital. We've also had members of our staff transferred to the hospital that utilize that same ambulance service, and family members in the waiting room that have utilized that same ambulance service.
So the question is, have you had to transfer someone that's doing a procedure to the hospital? All right, good, thank you. Please leave your, oh, wait, one more question, I'm so sorry. Absolutely. Representative Diane.
Sure. To inquire, you mentioned that you are one of 5 abortion providers in the state of Missouri?
One of 5 surgical abortion providers.
Okay. Were you chosen, or did you, is this something you wanted to do, or how were you picked to be one of 5?
So I'm a fellow in family planning. So family planning fellowship is advanced training, so it's a subspecialty of obstetrics and gynecology that deals with complex contraception, miscarriage management, abortion care, and we do most of the research in the nation on contraception, miscarriage management, abortion care, and transmitted infections. So it's part of my fellowship training that covers those finite areas of obstetrics and gynecology. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there is 5 minutes left in opposition testimony.
Good morning, good afternoon, rather. My name is Julia Lang, and I'm a third-year medical student at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm testifying on behalf of myself against House Bills 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, and 2271. I just want to start by saying I chose to come to WashU Medical School from California, where I'm from, because of the innovation in medical research. We basically have the 6th best research institution when it comes to medical training institutes in the United States. We have great scientific contributions every year to our growing fund of knowledge treating congenital and acquired diseases, and we have amazing patient-focused training that facilitates scientific discovery directly translated to clinic patients. WashU values research that directly benefits patients with individualized care. Culture of research and innovation is what really attracted me. But the number one reason I came to WashU was that they value the medical education. Our medical education is based in hard science. During the first year of medical school, we all have a cadaver that we learn normal anatomy and physiology on. After the first year, we have an opportunity to do hard science research and actually ourselves contribute to our growing fund of knowledge in medicine. Now, today, hearing these medically based, non-medically based legislations written in non-medical terms, and hearing that this unscientific language is going to be written into law and placed between me and my patients in the future is really scary. It's really scary for me. It's also really scary for all of my colleagues. I'm afraid for the future of Missouri. In which WashU has nurtured through supporting me in hard science is threatened by this anti-science legislation. This sends a clear message to the scientific community that they're not welcome in Missouri. Now, as for fetal tissue research, we've already been talked about how it's already illegal here by several redundant laws. And we've already talked about how it has led to scientific breakthroughs in the past and present in other states. As my colleague just emphasized, fetal tissue-derived cell lines have actually been responsible for the polio vaccine, many other vaccines, treatments for Parkinson's disease, and research in devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease. Specifically, the research into why fetuses have congenital anomalies, like we just heard some amazing stories about, are really important for us to research. These benefits of fetal tissue donation and stem cell research are why when I had an abortion in California in 2012, I chose to donate my fetal tissue to research. I made the informed decision to donate these products of my abortion in order to further scientific research in California. I did not feel taken advantage of. I was fully aware of what I was doing. I had all of the necessary information, and it was given to me in a compassionate way with the highest medical standards. I chose to donate my fetal tissue, and I signed off on it. And I'm very glad that I did that. I am confident that my donation contributed to high-quality scientific research in California. Unfortunately, women in Missouri aren't able to have that experience. Now, when I had my abortion, there was no thought in my head that went through that was just like, oh, I should have an abortion because I want to donate fetal tissue. There is no woman who has an abortion for that purpose. Let me make that clear. There are a million reasons that women have abortions, and not one of them is going to be because they want to donate tissue. I want to make that very clear. But after I had my abortion, I had this chance to donate something that would, maybe further research in medicine in the future, and I did it. And I'm very, very happy with it. It is clear that there's no medically based motivation for this legislation. It puts politicians between physicians and their patients, which is very dangerous for patients. These laws treat abortion as a risky procedure, which it is not. It is 20 times safer to have an abortion in the first trimester or any trimester than to have a live birth. It is also 10 times safer than having a colonoscopy. So I recommend that for any males here over the age of 50. I thank you for your time, and I'm welcoming any questions.
Thank you very much. Now, you had said that you were interested in women's health care?
Correct.
Okay, so what are the 3 leading causes of death for women?
So that depends on their age group, actually.
Well, what do you think they are?
For which age group?
Well, I'll give them to you. I'll help you out. The 3 leading causes of death for all women in the U.S. are heart disease, cancer, and lower chronic respiratory disease. And I have a list of the 10 leading causes of death for women, and childbirth is not one of those.
Is abortion one of those?
It is not either, but neither is childbirth.
Which number is it? Are you aware?
Well, the thing is that if we want healthy women, in the state of Missouri, then our time and our efforts need to go into the kinds of things that make a real difference in the lives of women and mothers in the state of Missouri. Women make 80% of the healthcare decisions for their families. They are the primary caregivers in their families. So giving them options where they can go and have their disease, have the availability of chronic diseases being discovered, being diagnosed, and being treated is a much more valuable expenditure of both their time and their money. It impacts their families, it impacts their children, and it creates a better place to be. When they receive that kind of treatment from physicians in healthcare settings, they can be put on a path of preventing diseases. They can be put on a path of cessation of smoking. They can be on an exercise routine. Many of the things that contribute to the health and well-being of women. So I hope that as you go forward in your career, that this important issue for women and women's health, and considering that they are the caregivers of, just about everyone, would become a great priority for you.
Thank you. I do plan on getting mammograms when I work at Planned Parenthood in the future.
Oh, do they have a mammogram machine there
Yes, they do.
at Planned Parenthood?
Correct.
That's a surprise to me.
It's a medical
Planned Parenthood,
facility.
which one is that?
The one on Forest Park in St. Louis.
No. All right. Thank you very much. Be sure to leave your witness forms and identify each one of your bills that you're testifying on. That concludes the time we have for opposition. 15 minutes, and we're ready to go to for informational purposes only.
Afternoon, committee. Sarah Rossi with the ACLU of Missouri. I was just going to be very specific on the whistleblower statute. There are already actually whistleblower protections that would cover Planned Parenthood in Missouri law. So that's my information. That's all I want to lay down.
All right, thank you. Others for informational purposes only? Others for informational purposes only? All right, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, and 2371. Committee, thank you very much. You've put in a long day.